but I want to address what is clearly an issue. The issue of what we call the culture wars, which I think are real. And they are being played largely by our mainstream news media, which, according to recent polls and research, is woefully undertrusted by you, the New Zealand public, and indeed is woefully biased largely to the left, largely towards Labour and the Greens in a political sense, rather than ACT or National. And I suppose New Zealand First you'd put in the same barrel. All right, later on, after 7:30, we're going to talk about a guy who's done some research on that bias. But let's take one example, or a couple of examples this morning, of how this works, how the culture wars that, I'll remind you, the mainstream media and the left of New Zealand politics say are not a thing, that they're imported from overseas. And they always seem to say there is no culture war just after they've launched an assault in the culture war, and just after that assault has been repelled or been met with return firepower from people on a different part of the political spectrum. I want to take, let's start with one example. Over the weekend, Andrea Vance, who is a featured columnist and writer for Stuff, which is perceived to be one of the most left-wing biased news organisations in the country, and Andrea Vance, who I know personally, who has interviewed me and did a reasonable job of it. Andrea Vance did a story about a National Party candidate called Stephen Jack. And Stephen Jack, if you had read the story, had made, well, an off-colour, a risque joke. And I'm going to repeat the joke here so you can have your opinion on it. The joke was, I like my woman like I like my COVID-19 and easily spreadable. That was the joke. Now, as Andrea Vance wrote this story in the most widely read media platform, Stuff, in this country, the story was written to make it appear as if Mr. Jack had made that joke and posted it online. The problem from the very start of this story is that Tairi National candidate Stephen Jack didn't make the joke. He reposted a collection of works from a stand-up comedian on his social media. He reposted that joke. He did not originate it. But the story was written to create the illusion, the false illusion, that he had. What that gave Ms. Vance the opportunity to do was criticise National's selection process, to write a piece which delved into anyone who was ever caught picking their nose for the National Party, particularly if they were white and male and cis. It was an opportunity to launch an assault in the culture wars, which Ms. Vance did with seeming relish. I criticised this piece of journalism or non-journalism on social media and pointed out the clear inaccuracies and the misleading nature of the story. I used what is increasingly becoming a less biased and more open forum, Twitter, which, in case you do not use Twitter, and look, as far as I know, about 9 to 12% of New Zealanders are on Twitter. They're some of the maddest, nuttiest, most obsessive people in the world. And I criticised Andrea Vance on Twitter. And I got quite some support for me pointing out that this story was basically a construct, a stick with which Stuff could beat the National Party just 6 months out from an election. And I got a reply eventually, because I was getting so much support. I got a reply from Andrea Vance, who had written the original misleading article. And this is what she said. Sean, you and I both know you are far too clever to be serious with this intellectually dishonest whataboutery. The culture war thing is so tiresome, so respectfully, leave me out of it. So Andrea Vance and staff have constructed a false news story to discredit a political party they are opposed to, and therefore boost the political party that has given them the many millions of dollars in recent years. And then they say, oh, nothing to see here, leave me out of this. Too late, Andrea Vance. You have published under a byline in the most read media in this country a piece that is rubbish. And I have every right to engage and comment on it. I responded, I didn't write the article, I just responded to it. Happy to have you on the platform to discuss and debate. And what I got was, back from Andrea Vance, too early, I don't get out of bed for less than $55 million. A cute reference to the $55 million spent on mainstream journalism and woke journalism by the New Zealand government. Let's say if there was a culture war on Twitter in this exchange, I would appear in my own echo chamber to have won it. But we have had no retraction from staff, no apology from staff, and indeed in their newspaper, the Doyen Post, because they're some stupid thing about taking out the Dominion and they're dropping a letter each day. I read in the Dominion Post, and it's posted on Stuff this morning, that Christopher Luxon now insists National has a very good vetting process in place for its candidates. So they double down on the attack on National created from a story which misled the reader in the first place. So apparently Jack is the second National Party candidate to face questions around their suitability this year. Actually, I would imagine, Andrea, that, who wrote this piece? Oh, political reporters, just as political reporters. I would imagine every candidate for National has asked questions about their suitability. That's what a vetting process is. But poor old Stephen Jack, he didn't tell that joke. He reposted it. And is it really that offensive? I'd say no. I'd say it's, if a stand-up comedian delivers it in the context of a stand-up show, it's chuckly. If you want to get offended, tough. Tough that you get offended. But I think what we really should be offended at is a news media that is so willfully biased, so openly biased, and then claims nothing to see here. Oh, I don't want to get involved in the argument that I started. It is classic spray and walk away. So I'm going to repeat my invitation to Andrea Vance. You can come on the platform and explain why you wrote that piece of crap. There's your open invitation, 0800 33 2283.